Okay. Hello, Aunt Tammy.
Hey, hi Joey.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Not bad. Nice Sunday.
Oh yeah, it's nice today. We had some bad storms last week, but it's nice today.
Nice today. Okay. So I'm gonna talk about when you were going to Alaska. Do you know what years that was?
Okay, yes, we left in 19 I left to go to Alaska in 1996 and we came back in 2004. At least I came back in 2004. My husband stayed a little longer, Steve.
Okay. Okay. So do you mind if I first ask with why you went to Alaska?
Sure. I'm glad to tell you that, well, I wasn't glad at the time when I went to Alaska. So I don't, you probably don't remember because it's been like 30 years ago, or a little over 30, but Desert Shield, Desert Storm was going on, and that was right before the Gulf War. So my husband that I was engaged, well, we had just gotten married. We hadn't been married very long. Actually, we weren't married. Let me back up. We weren't married, but we were engaged to be married. And so Desert Shield was going on, and he worked for the military for Langley Air Force Base as a crew chief for fighter pilots. So for the F-15 jet. So we were supposed to be married in October. So this was in August, and they said you have to leave, you have to go. And so we got married like that day that he had to leave. And so we were married like a day before he left to go to Desert Shield. And so we were in he was in Desert Shield, came back. Um, that's the reason I went to Alaska because I'm married to an Air Force person, and that was a long answer, but that he got orders and we had to go to Alaska. So I had no choice and I didn't want to, but I grew to love it.
Okay. Could you explain what Desert Shield is a little bit?
Okay, so Desert Shield. So the Gulf War was a war between Saudi Arabia and America.
Mm.
And over in Saudi Arabia, they put up what the military calls a presence by bringing in a bunch of forces in. The war didn't actually start. Nobody had declared war, but Desert Shield was the pre-war that they were preparing for what was probably going to happen and did happen when they had the Gulf War. So Desert Shield lasted a few months and then they actually declared war, but then our forces were already over there. And being as my husband was working for the first fighter wing, which is Langley Air Force Base, and he was the crew chief, they had to be there first because they were the planes securing the sky. Excuse me, the skies.
Okay, that makes sense. So now we're gonna move a little bit more in time, and then what were some of the things that you did in Alaska?
Oh, so when we went to Alaska, when I first got there, I hated being there because I wanted to stay here. But we got there and I realized there's a lot of snow in Alaska. And I said, let's try skiing. So we started cross country skiing and it was really fun. So every school in Alaska has a cross country ski track and it's a run track, a track course in the summer, which is they do have summer. And then in the winter, it skis and they groom it and they make tracks and you can cross country ski, which you ski, but it's more on flat surface, but there's hills. You climb the hill and you slide down. They have ice skating rinks at the schools that you can use if you live there. Um, there's biking trails. They had like 30 miles of biking trails all around the city. We went kayaking. Actually, we didn't have a kayak. We went canoeing. We got a canoe.
Okay.
Um, there's all kinds of lakes to canoe in. We went canoeing in the rivers. Um, I joined the what did they call this place? It was on base. It was the Wildlife Fish and Game Administration, and I joined as a volunteer. And so I would go and count the fish. They had what they called fish weirs, and it would trap the fish in a certain area. And then the people, you would go and count to see how many fish were and then release them. So you could tell how many of the salmon were swimming upstream and what kind, and possibly catch if they had problems or sometimes they had a mutation. Like I remember they told us these fish were like the king salmon had round spots on their tails and the pink salmon had oblong spots. And I might have that backwards, but it was one or the other. And they started finding them that they were almost like mutating. And so they didn't know if the two breeds were intermating and causing like it was. They just did a lot of research to make it short, and it was very fun.
Okay. What was your favorite activity you did in Alaska?
I would have to say skiing was our favorite. Like in the winter, we would ski. Like I still own my skis now. We had 7 inches of snow last couple weeks ago, and we took them out and we tried to ski. It was not nearly as fun as it was in Alaska because it was like slow and slushy, but in Alaska, like it was just great. You would go out. I remember the first time I went skiing, it was 20 degrees. I thought I would freeze to death. And Steve said, "Oh, you don't need that many clothes." I like put on every clothes, like 3 pair of socks. I had scarves, I had hats, I had a vest, I had a jacket. And by the time I finished skiing, like all my clothes except for just my pants and my shirt were in the trees because I got so hot. I was like, "Oh, I don't need this. I don't need it." So I came back and there's like clothes like everywhere in the trees. Because in Alaska, it's a very, very dry cold. So 20 degrees doesn't seem that cold. It isn't damp like it is in this area.
Okay.
Sorry, Alexa wants to talk to you.
No worries. Okay. So we're gonna move into another major event during this time, which was 9/11, and I'm curious how it affected you in Alaska because there's such a big distance between New York and Alaska.
Well, that's a good question because, with you saying there's such a big distance, I remember that we were asleep. There's a 4 hour time difference in between the East Coast and
Hmm.
Alaska. So we were asleep, and my husband, Steve, his dad called on the phone, and it was like 4 in the morning because, it happened early in the morning. But it was 4 in the morning there because it was, I guess, close to 8 here. I just remember it being close to 4 in the morning when I found out it had already happened. And so he called and we turned on the TV and as soon as we turned on the TV, we saw the second plane fly into the building and the building collapsed. And we were like, what? Because we're asleep, and
Yeah.
we're like, I'm like, is this real? Is this like, and I mean, even though we were far away, like the whole world was just sad and it just
Yeah.
it just affected everyone as far as being sad. Like air travel changed a lot. And because I was up in Alaska and I had to fly all the way across the country to come visit and come see my parents, air travel was harder because then you had your TSA was developed because they never had TSA before that.
Mm.
And you had to it was just so much more secure, which, I mean, it was a little bit of a hassle, but we knew why. We understood.
Yeah. I think that's like really interesting to see how it's like a large gap physically in geography lies, but like you're actually still like connected across like the United States. Like
Yeah, I know. You feel like you're that far away and there's a gap. You're not even connected as far
yeah,
as land, but you're connected.
it's a 4 hour time distance, but you're still like you hear about it almost as soon as it happens, which is like
Yeah,
that's pretty cool, especially with the technology and like how it's
yeah.
if you saw
I
something
mean, something like that. Because when the phone rang at 4, we were like,
yeah
"What?"
if you saw something like that on the news today, would you
Sorry, I
believe
think
it?
it's lagging a little.
Uh-oh. If you saw something on the
What
news
was that?
if you saw something in the news today, would you believe it or would you just like question it?
Well, it depends. If it was something like that, it's kind of unbelievable, but I wouldn't think that the news media would be able to put something out there. But like at first, when you see it, you're
Yeah.
like, "Man, this is this a movie? Is this like what?" Your brain doesn't register it, it's so crazy.
You just don't like you can't comprehend the idea of what happened yet.
Yeah, like how am I asleep and I turn on the TV and like buildings are falling. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's so far away. You're like, that's New York.
Yeah.
Is that really happening? Because you're seeing it on TV, but then like it has to be happening.
Yeah. Have you ever went to New York before that event or after?
I actually went to New York with you,
Yeah.
and your brothers, and your mom and dad, and that's the only time I've been to New York, and it was really fun. I'd like to come up and go back.
Alright.
I really liked it.
So going back to the idea, like you never actually seen New York in person, but as soon as you saw like the towers, you recognized it and you knew it was New York. So like,
Yes, because the Twin Towers, like since you've lived there, there's never been Twin Towers, right? You haven't, there
mhm,
wasn't. But the Twin Towers was like they were the tallest buildings, and when you saw the Twin Towers, you knew that was New York.
yeah,
But then they were just gone. It was just like it's kind of shocking. Like to you, they were never there, but
yeah,
it's almost like if you went to New York tomorrow and the Twin Towers were there, it would be that strange.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like
yeah.
the opposite.
And like the opposite, because you
Yeah.
always had them, and then they fell down, and we never had
Yeah.
them.
And then they were
And
gone. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So now gonna start to wrap it up a little bit, but you can take as long as you want. Is why did you return to Virginia? Like, what motivated you to come back?
Okay, so we had moved to Alaska and I didn't want to move. But then I grew to love everything. There was so much fun stuff to do and wildlife and it's beautiful there, mountains and we don't really have mountains here. You have to drive a while, but we don't have rocky mountains like that with the snow on top. But um my husband's father had started having some heart problems and my parents had some medical problems and I would always fly back and help them. And so we had bought a house in Wasilla, Alaska, and we had two horses and we had built a barn. And then just one day, my horse needed some kind of minor surgery, but the vets weren't real good there, and I was worried about him.
Yeah.
And so we just had, it's kind of like it was just fate. We started talking and we weren't even planning to come back. And I think Steve said, "Do you want to move back?" And I'm like, "Or what?" And then I was like, "Well, yeah, I guess because we're retiring and we just purchased the farm here that my father left to all of the family. And so we purchased a big piece of it and I never wanted to lose the property. And so I said, "Well, I'm always going to own this property, so maybe we should just move back to it." And I called my mom and I said, "Don't get excited, but if we moved back, could we have some property?" And she said, "Oh my gosh, you're coming back." And so like pretty much after that, and my family, I didn't see my family as much, so that's what brought us back. I mean, we loved it, but it wasn't where I grew up. So
Yeah, so you just want to return back
yeah,
to family.
come
Um,
back to home and family.
if given the opportunity, would you go back and like stay in Alaska for a while, or would you rather just stay where you are?
I'm gonna stay here, but I have actually been back to Alaska. I went a couple years ago for a trip, and I would love to go for another trip. Like I would go, like if I had an opportunity to go and stay for weeks at a time, I would go and stay for a few weeks. But I'm gonna live here. I'm not gonna
You're gonna stay.
move back there. Yeah, and it's really grown up. It's different. It's a lot bigger than it was when I lived there. A lot more city.
So, what part of Alaska did you spend most of your time in?
So when we moved to Alaska, we moved to Anchorage. And I didn't like Anchorage at all because like when you think of Alaska, you think of like it's going to be the middle of nowhere. It
Yeah.
was actually like Norfolk. It was like, and I was like, this is the city. I don't want to live in the city. And so we moved to a little town called Eagle River. And that was about 12 miles out of Anchorage. And we rented a little log cabin. But then when we went to buy a house, we ended up in Wasilla. I don't know if anybody's heard of Sarah Palin. She ran for office years back as one of the vice presidents. She was running for office, but she lived in Wasilla actually. But we lived in Wasilla and we bought a house there, and that's where we spent. Well, we lived in the house for 4 years, but we rented Eagle River for like 3 years, so probably pretty equal amounts. We were there for 9, so we probably were in
Yeah.
Eagle River longer than we were in Wasilla.
Okay. Is there anything I missed about Alaska that you want to go over?
I don't know. You're a pretty good interviewer. I mean, you covered a lot of stuff. Like, I wish you guys had gotten to visit um, when we lived up there. Maybe we should all take a trip and go back, and then we can how about interview from there?
Yeah.
I can
Wait,
take you.
when you left in 2004, right?
Yes.
So I wasn't even born yet, so like I couldn't have quite gone. There's
Oh,
always a chance now.
hey, well, you couldn't pull that off.
No, not quite.
Oh.
Little
We'll have to go
Alzheimer's.
back. You'll have to go back. There's a place, and hopefully it's still there. It was there last time I went, and they're called the Moose Farm or the Reindeer Farm in Palmer, Alaska, and they have like hand-raised reindeer, which are caribou, same animal, and they have like if a moose like becomes an orphan as a baby, they raise it. So, like, you can go out and pet them and feed them. It's really cool.
Okay. That should be enough for the interview, I think. So I guess I'll just say a quick thank you for being willing to do this, and
Okay,
we
well,
appreciate
thank
you
you
all the
for
time.
choosing me to do
Yeah,
this.
no problem. That was a great choice. It's a very interesting story to hear about, and I'm glad I got along it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll probably stop there. That should be enough. Yeah, I got a 14-minute on this, and that missed the first little bit. Let me stop the recording.